Star Trek, The Official Guide to the Animated Series by Aaron Harvey and Rich Shepis? Shepis? I don't know. Anyway, not here to talk about this. I'll talk about this on an upcoming episode of Sovereign Trek, which actually one of our questions, I think, made a mention of that, not that it's going to be about Star Trek. But just ended up getting this in. I had it pre-ordered for months. Actually, hell, I think I had this pre-ordered for like a year. But finally arrived, and I'll review that on a future episode. But I'm a big fan. I like the animated series of Star Trek because, well, for one, I like that kind of Funimation animation. Or Filmation. Was it Filmation? Anyway, whatever. The company that also did He-Man, as well as Heavy Metal, the movie. Not Heavy Metal 2000, but the original one. I love that style. I think it has such a unique look, and it's so cool. In fact, I don't think I ever did my review of Star Trek versus Transformers. It'd be perfect to do these two and two. All right, well, anyway, that's for the near future. But yeah, I'm such a fan of that, and the fact that, the stories were shorter and it kind of had to be a kid's show, but, Star Trek is Star Trek, whether it's a kid's show or not. Of course, we'll find out if that's actually true when, some odd 2 animated series that are being developed right now for Star Trek, that they're going to be on Nickelodeon, which is so weird. Anyway, whatever. We'll see what happens with all that. Something else I've been reading, and I'm actually going to end up getting these scanned. I got a couple of books from the editions of, in fact, this is going to lead in nicely to really our first topic, which is playing off of a question from 2 weeks ago, or it's finally bringing together or bringing culmination to a question that I was asked 2 weeks ago about a book that the person asked, had I read this yet? What did I think of it? Well, now I have read this book, and I'm going to tell you what I think of it. Maybe it's 3 weeks ago. Anyway, in fact, I shared a picture of me, just to let you know I'm still alive. I shared a picture of me with one of these books on Twitter just recently. Of course, find me there at Sovereign Tech. I've noticed a few of you have decided to come and subscribe to or follow my Twitter account recently. But anyway, it's by L.A. Rollins, who was a real firebrand of a character. Not unlike Ragnar Redbeard in that he held some positions that do make you wonder, do make you go, if not worse. But his book, and it's just, you could barely call it a book because frankly, you could almost read it in an afternoon. And I did. And I might do a review of this in the near future as well after I read his second book. But it's The Myth of Natural Rights. And it's just a stunning little monograph. I love it. I love this book. And in fact, a part of me, I think this book is so cutting. So there's a company called 9 Branded Books, little indie publisher. And then of course there's Underworld Amusements, who they've been putting out a lot of Egoist texts that we've talked about. In fact, they put out the Egoist, or what could be considered an Egoist text, that I'll be reviewing here at the beginning of this Q&A, which again, I was asked to, so I'll do it here. But anyway, so they together, they're working together on putting out like this portable L.A. Rollins library. The first book that they put out was called Lucifer's Lexicon. And that's kind of a classic for L.A. Rollins. And then the second book, even though it was actually the first work that L.A. Rollins did, was Myth of Natural Rights. Now, L.A. Rollins has been, he was featured in Reason Magazine back in the 80s. The book Myth of Natural Rights is actually from 1983. This guy was very popular and was very critical of characters who were alive at the time, like Murray Rothbard and so on. And, I got to tell you, I'll do a full review in the future. Maybe I'll do a double header because there's such short books of both Lucifer's Lexicon and The Myth of Natural Rights. And I assume there's going to be more volumes in this series in the portable L.A. Rollins to come out. Here's the thing. When you take out, and some might disagree with this. In fact, email me if you do. I want to have these conversations. And there's nowhere where you can have them, right? As respectful as a lot of the organizers, especially in later years, of, like, say, Porkfest and other things have been, they never they never wanted me to speak about liberty. They wanted me to speak about tech, which I understand. That's my, that's what I'm known for. And I'm, by their words, I'm very damned good at it. So I understand why they wanted me to talk about that. But I never really got an invitation, say, to talk about egoism there. Now, I can kind of understand why, because, I've called the concept of rights bullshit for a very long time, for years. It's a conversation that's come up over, multiple times over sovereign tech's history. But the thing is once you remove this concept of natural rights, that's what libertarianism is built on top of. You understand? And I think Rothbard knew that, and that's why he went, guns blazing, as it were, after L.A. Rollins when he came out with this little book back in the 80s, and why others did as well. It wasn't just Rothbard. And so, there's a part of me that I wish, and this book has been around again since 1983. I wish I had this book, and I know it was out there because I think it was 9 Branded Books that put out an edition in 2008. I wish that I had this book, 10 years ago, or at least 8 years ago, or whatever, because it would have saved me a lot of time. Now, when I actually get to reviewing these books, I'll talk about how actually in the end, I'm glad I didn't have it, because the idea of rights not actually being a thing and not existing, that's something that I actually came to fairly independently. And integrating, biological functions as the basis of what is, a healthy expression of the human condition is not something at all that's like a part of L.A. Rollins' work. But I think that's an important part of the discussion of how you do explain, what's the most conducive way for humans to interact with each other. When you eliminate the concept, the completely unscientific, and after you read The Myth of Natural Rights, the outrageous concept of natural rights. So at some point I'll get into that, but I know I have a ton of libertarian listeners, and hey, rock and roll, whatever I've said this before, and I've also reiterated it recently on Twitter, because it feels like I need to reiterate these things, for whatever reason, because division can be a good thing. Arguments can be a good thing, blah, blah, blah. I don't live for any of that shit, but I get it. But look, if your goal and your outlook on life, if it's about peace, we're on the same side. I don't care what in or, what ism you put at the end of, or in front of who and what you are. I don't care. If your goal is peace, great. We're on the same fucking team. Okay. I don't care if you're an egoist, a libertarian, a communist, whatever. I don't give a shit. Okay. But yeah, like this, there was a while where I considered myself a libertarian. And if I had read this book, 8 to 10 years ago, it would have just undercut that whole notion for me. And would instantly, I just said, well, no, I'm not a libertarian. not that would have necessarily been a disrespect towards libertarians, but just that I would see, oh wait, libertarianism is built on top of the concept of natural rights. I don't think natural rights exist. I can't call myself a libertarian. So, or not that I can't, but I don't want to, just to be logically consistent. It's a beautiful book. Anyway, we'll talk about it in a future episode. I have so many books that I need to finally do review episodes for. It's been, I'll tell you, 2019 has been a roller coaster of roller coasters. It is the Superman at Six Flags in reverse. That's just what it's been. So, I appreciate everyone's patience with things getting released, and with the sometimes uneven schedule of releases of the main Sovereign Tech show. Again, I'm trying to build something very big here and something very special. And there are, in this sense, there are growing pains that come along with it. But I want to be ahead of the curve. I want to be bringing out, really stuff that you find interesting, stuff that you find value in. And then, value gets returned to me in all kinds of ways. And it, you know, it really, really has. I mean, I wish I could tell you some of the things that like Sovereign Tech listeners have done for me, and people in varying ways attached to Sovereign Tech, what they've done for me, that have just in many ways saved my life. Especially, you know, hell, even just in the past month. So, you know, I'm honored by all this. And so I never want to stop. And, you know, I want to keep rocking with it. So thank you, because if you're hearing this, that means you are donating in some way. And I'm honored. And, you know, if you ever want to do more, please feel free. But anyway, so we have enough of that L.A. Rollins. But we do have a book review to get into, because actually it might have been like 3 Q&As ago that somebody, wow, this chair is like stuck in a rut. There we go. It's a wonderfully comfortable chair, but god damn it. It sinks in. I don't know. Maybe that's just because I weigh, I don't know, 240 or however the fuck much I weigh. All right. So, but this was asked of me what I thought of this book. And I talked about this book because this book became part of a larger conversation a little over a month ago with not the most recent shooting that has happened in the United States, but a shooting that happened previously where this shooter, I think it was at that Garlic Festival in California, had shared or somehow showed that he was reading or had read the book from the 19th century. Again, publication date is kind of up to debate. There's what, you know, the publisher says, there's what the author says, then there's like, wait a minute, they're referencing things that happened after this book could have possibly been published. And I mean, you run into all these issues. But the book is Might is Right. Arguably published in 1897. Again, those dates can be, and it had been updated and republished multiple times. So, you know, there's a lot of conjecture in that. But yeah, the shooter had said that they had read this, and so then Twitter went aflame for a day with, as it does, not for a day, maybe it's like 5 minutes, I don't know if it was a day, with, you know, oh, well, this shooter read Might is Right, you know, and so, you know, this book is bad, blah, 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 you know, and all this crap, and people were wanting to, I don't know, ban the book. You had other people, anarchists, in fact, more of your left market anarchists, who were saying, see, I've been warning you about egoism. It leads to people becoming shooters, and it, you know, and just nonsense. Because egoism, you know, for me, led to the exact opposite, of, you know, being violent. But regardless, you know, this book was a hot topic, and it's not uninteresting that this book would get an authoritative edition by, you know, from Underworld Amusements getting released this year. And so I ended up getting a copy after I was made aware that even existed. I had read this book when I was a teenager, and it didn't really, you know, make me violent. Actually, I've, you know, because I think a lot of people would probably say to me, so the book Might is Right. They would say, well, but Stallion, in fact, I got somebody did email me with this, but Stallion, you're saying it didn't make you violent when you read it as a teenager, but then you joined the military, you know, not long after. And so do you think Might is Right somehow gave you the idea that the military was okay to be a part of? Absolutely not. I know for a fact there wasn't a goddamn thing of Might is Right or the words of Ragnar Redbeard or anything like that that was crossing my mind when I joined the military. The thing that inspired me to join the military was the 9/11 truth movement, because they were such obnoxious assholes and so insulting. And, you know, with many of their comments that the Jews were behind 9/11 and all this other stuff, that's what inspired me to join the military, or that was a catalyst. Anyway, I mean, there's other parts, you know, that were there too. I had family members that died, you know, on 9/11. I mean, it was, yeah, there was a lot there, but it sure as fuck wasn't Might is Right. I mean, not even close. So anyway, let's get to the new edition, shall we? And this is very new, as in this just came out this is 2019, right? Yeah, this just came out in 2019. Again, well, I guess 1896 is actually their first publication date, whatever, for this. So this edition, Might is Right, the authoritative edition, by Underworld Amusements. Of course, the book is by Ragnar Redbeard. It was edited and put together by an asshole who might even be a worse person than Ragnar Redbeard. Actually, I didn't realize this. There is claims that we know now really who the author of Might is Right was, because Ragnar Redbeard is just, a pseudonym. But it was a guy, Arthur. Oh, hell. I'm trying to remember his name. He was like a British politician, I think. Or he was a British guy anyway, that was an author, his name's Arthur, not author, who was a politician, I think, in New Zealand. Then he ended up coming to America, but his name is Arthur Desmond. Which is interesting. I mean, I wasn't aware that we had, that humanity in its collective state, that we'd figured that out. But I guess it was Arthur Desmond was the author of this. And now Trevor Blake, the reason I called him an asshole, and maybe even worse than Arthur Desmond, is this is a guy. So I get these texts, I get these books, especially, not especially, but including from Underworld Amusements. Underworld Amusements, for some reason, they don't make their books available in ebooks. I don't know what the concept is around that. I am of half a mind to email Kevin Slaughter and maybe ask, but I feel like, in fact, we might get into this with another question later on. I feel like that part of the reason people will only do ebook editions, or maybe like why there's certain musicians who will only release on vinyl today, it's true, or maybe they'll only release a physical edition on CD. I know that's true for a lot of soundtracks that I'm into. A lot of it, and there's other cases of this. A lot of times I think it's to be a version of DRM, which for an egoist organization, which supposedly Underworld Amusements is kind of ridiculous, but I feel like it's just a way of like forcing people to have to buy the book. So because what happened was, and I talked about this a few months ago, I buy these books and I get them scanned, and then I have historically made them available online for free via various means. And Max Stirner wouldn't mind that at all, right? Egoist to egoist, he would say, yeah, IP is a spook, intellectual property. But Trevor Blake actually emailed Mediafire and Patreon and whoever else is relevant saying, you need to take these books down, blah, blah, blah. He basically did not like that I exercised my might, which might just means ability to do something. He was not pleased with this. So, there were takedown notices and all this crap over his books. So I think, well, I'll just say it. I think Trevor Blake is an insecure asshole. Which is ironic because here he is talking about, and he has a very poignant introduction to this book. It's ironic that he's talking about power and and he rightfully so. Like, let's understand this. So actually, much like L.A. Rollins has some very strange ideas at points. He seems to somewhat support slavery. Of course, if you're going to say that that's an egoist problem, no, why don't you go ahead and read some Walter Block libertarians and you tell me about who supports slavery? He does. So L.A. Rollins isn't so crazy in that, but he does seem to engage in some Holocaust denial. I mean, there's some ugly things within the work of L.A. Rollins. There's some ugly things within the work of a lot of egoists, but does that take away from their overall message or from the great things that they write in their stuff? No, just like in Might is Right. And both, so Peter Gilmore, who of course is basically, I guess, the head of the Church of Satan now. Peter Gilmore, he does an introduction for this, a new introduction. And Trevor Blake also does. And they both come out swinging very early in the book. And I think it's the right thing for them to do. That, when Ragnar Redbeard gets into his misogyny and rampant racism, albeit contradictory on both counts, and we'll talk about that a little bit here. When he gets into those subjects, they call him weak, because they're talking about how this is such a great text of power with Might is Right. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. Again, we're talking about personal power, okay? Because, well, all right, we'll get into that in the review. But, it's just so funny for Trevor Blake to talk about, weakness and how, this sounds so weak. And like Trevor Blake is trying to sound like such a badass, collecting all his power and everything. And when he can't handle his books getting released for free, you know, who's weak now, Trevor? Who's weak now? But whatever. Okay. And I will be doing the same to this book, by the way. So he can, well, 2 words for you, as DX would say, suck it. Anyway, so Trevor Blake put this together. Peter Gilmore's introduction is very well done, very interesting. I think Peter Gilmore, I got to admit, in some ways, I think this is a man after my own heart. In fact, I remember his introduction for the Satanic Scriptures that he put together, where he's like listing off his heroes, and like at the very bottom, he mentions both Frank Herbert and Gene Roddenberry and thanks them, for what they contributed. Like he says, to Gene for showing us, a possibility. And for Frank Herbert for showing us what we could be. And I mean, if there are 2 figures that have inspired me endlessly, it is certainly Frank Herbert and Gene Roddenberry. I mean, there's plenty others too, but it was so cool that he mentions those names. Anyway, so Gilmore's introduction is interesting. Trevor Blake's is haha. But basically what we have here is this reminds me, now Trevor Blake clearly had it in mind to turn this into a Bible-esque text, okay, where he categorizes it with chapter and verse and makes footnotes. This thing's loaded with footnotes, as well as categorizations that are similar to, say, a study version of whatever Bible you happen to be reading. And his compilation style, because he takes at least 4 different versions of the text. His style is similar to, it reminds me of how Thomas Jefferson, when he did what's known as the Jefferson Bible, or the Life and Times of Jesus Christ, or the Life and Morals, or something like that. But the Jefferson Bible, where Jefferson took 4 different translations of the New Testament, and then he took that and compiled it into one little book, which ended up becoming the Jefferson Bible. It's very similar to that, and I appreciate that work and how it comes together, because that work does end up resolving there's contradictions that seem to be a typo, and then there's contradictions that are just rampant contradictions in this book. For example, okay, there is definitely anti-Semitism in this book, but it's hilarious that, each chapter has different subsections. In one subsection, you have Ragnar Redbeard praising King Solomon, King David, King Saul, right? But then in the next section, he's ripping on Jews. And it's like, wait a minute, or just, 2 subsections later. I'm of half a mind, if it is Arthur Desmond or whatever, I think just about anybody has to be somewhat mentally unstable or insane to be a politician. Which is hilarious when you hear politicians talking about mental illness, right? It's like, wait, you're a politician. I think you're kind of inherently mentally ill. But this feels like a book literally written by a madman. Now, why I say this, but clearly one who's very intelligent. Because the amount of references, when you look at the footnotes, the bulk of the footnotes in this authoritative edition for Might is Right have to do with where is Ragnar Redbeard quoting from, or what is he referencing in the way that he's saying things? Because Ragnar Redbeard writes this in for Trevor Blake to present it in a biblical fashion makes sense, because Ragnar Redbeard writes it in a biblical fashion, with "O thou art" and all this kind of crap, right? That kind of language. And Trevor Blake really did the yeoman's work of showing where, what Ragnar Redbeard's quoting. So obviously very, an intelligent person, of course, that doesn't equate to being a virtuous person by any means. Okay. But, clearly an intelligent person, but the madness in it, and I think this is what grabs people and why this book is still talked about and read today. It grabs people because nobody today would write this way. Meaning that, this guy is just saying whatever the fuck stream of consciousness is on his mind and just letting it rip. There is no political correctness whatsoever. And I'm not going to deny a certain attraction to that, where somebody is just balls out saying whatever the fuck is on their mind and just laying it out. And he does, and there are things I may disagree with some of the terms that he uses. I mean, of course I disagree with him on the misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, and all that. Obviously, I'm a Jew, but I may disagree with some of the terminology that he uses, but I get what he's saying. And so even when he says war and things like this, I know he's speaking in a more abstract sense. And some of this shit is just real gold, and I mean, I remember thinking similarly back when I was a teenager, like, wow, this is, again, for Peter Gilmore to say, this is powerful. And of course he's saying how Anton LaVey said it was powerful. Yeah, you do feel like the personal power just oozing off of the page with a lot of this. And you can't find, certainly not a popular book. I mean, I'm sure there's some asshat who writes horrible shit out there, but you can't find a book that would say the things that this says today. You just can't. It doesn't exist. And I think it's completely a product of its time, that you can only talk about this kind of extreme individualism, this kind of extreme, personal power and all this, back when, you could really express it. And back when, you weren't, held down by a lot of, shall we say, social mores. And so it's an impressive book in that sense. At the same time, that madness leads to rampant contradictions throughout the text. And I can kind of see where that leads people to think that maybe he's just, maybe Arthur Desmond or Ragnar Redbeard is doing a parody here. He doesn't actually believe what he's saying. And his hints that he doesn't really believe it is because he's contradicting himself at points. And so he doesn't have a solid foundation in what he's saying. I'm more inclined to think the guy's just nuts, and if it is Arthur Desmond, one of the interesting things about Arthur Desmond as a person was that he was very, very private, and it's very hard to track information about him. Now, that doesn't make one insane, but that does hint at a certain paranoia, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, where you could live a very anonymous life with very little effort, but to put effort into it does make you kind of wonder. Again, paranoia is a very good and wonderful thing. But it is not whole cloth like society would claim today, but it can be a sign of, maybe somebody's not playing with a full deck. So, and again, certainly in the 19th or 20th century, that may be so. But regardless, why don't we talk about, some of the, shall we say, the beauty of the text? Because it does come off as a poetry. Again, it's erratic. I mean, and there's so many contradictions. It's really something, because in one vein, he's talking about like women should be strong, but then he's also saying they should be like subjugated. And I mean, there's parts of this that very much read like an MRA manual, or even, this is like stuff, basically Ragnar Redbeard is saying in this, a man should be like a Chad, right? Like the incels talk about, It's a crazy book, but there are some great, here, let me read this part, because there's some parts of it where it's like, fuck yeah, Here we go. This is, if you have it, this is from page 218, if you happen to have this book. But here it is. All arbitrary rules of right and wrong are insolent invasions of personal liberty. He who would maintain his manhood must ignore them and abandon them wherever and whenever possible, except he has investigated them, paralleled them with nature, and without coercion agrees to abide thereby as a modus vivendi, which modus vivendi just means way of living. If he accepts them on other conditions as his lifelong load, that is his funeral. If he is eager to handicap himself or commit suicide, why shouldn't he? That's his own business. A sensible man should never conform to any rule or custom simply because it has been highly commended by others, alive or dead. If they are alive, he should suspect their motives. If dead, they are out of court. He should be a law unto himself in all things. Otherwise, he permits himself to be demonetized to the level of a domesticated animal. And basically, he's saying that you need to check on everything that you are told as far as what is, this right or wrong. What is this morality? And basically to compare, what is right and wrong with what you see in nature. And if you don't see it there, basically he's bringing up what I was mentioning earlier a little bit when we were talking about L.A. Rollins. If it doesn't have a scientific basis, okay, if it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, then it's somebody trying to control you in some form or fashion, right? Which, not a terrible message to get out there. Of course, said in a very poetic fashion, but not a terrible message to get out there. And I mean, here, let me go down a little bit, a few paragraphs here. A man's first duty in this world is to himself. And the word himself includes those near and dear ones who have twined their tendrils around his heart. A man's kindred are part of himself. He should not forget that when fighting for his own hand, he is fighting for them. His strength is their rampart. Their strength is his glory. The family and the individual are a unit. Now that's beautiful. I mean, because my definition of love is the same as Robert Heinlein's. I mean, I just lifted right from Heinlein. When someone's happiness is love is when someone else's happiness is intertwined with your own. That's somebody that you love. And so he's basically saying here that, you can have, I mean, he's in an egoist term, he's very much talking about, I think, or in some ways he's talking about a union of egoists. A union of egoists requires the consent of others involved as well. That's not necessarily what he's saying here. But regardless, that, yeah, it's all about the individual, but, you can have other people in your lives that become a part of you. And I mean, like some of this is just gorgeous terms. And, this doesn't disagree with anything Ayn Rand would have said, where she said, if you're not your best, you're not any good to anyone else around you that you care about. So if you actually wanted to be altruistic, you need to be selfish, right? That's what Ayn Rand would say. And that's in a very, in different terms, that's what Ragnar Redbeard's saying. So, I mean, so there's things in this, especially, I mean, look, that was way before Ayn Rand hit the stage, before she was even fucking born. Or around there anyway. Very few people, especially in the English language, probably would have read. There's these sprinklings of truth throughout this book, and beautifully stated, powerfully stated, that are just wonderful. But then it gets laced with a lot of horseshit. It gets laced with, again, racism, misogyny, and anti-Semitism, which also, again, to the credit of the publishers, to the editor, the publisher, Peter Gilmore doing the introduction, for them to instantly point out that whenever Ragnar Redbeard is talking about those three things, again, misogyny, or at least two of them, anti-Semitism is a form of racism. When the misogyny and the racism comes into play, that he comes off as weak and he is wrong. I mean, right on. But they rightfully bring up that still there's amazing things in this, really, really to glean from. Now, as far as the authoritative edition goes, I thought a lot of the footnotes were very, very tedious. I'm glad they're there, I guess. In fact, actually, I have a comment about that. I mean, and the way I read it, I don't know that I experienced it that much better having it be compiled from these 4 editions. There's a lot of little poems that get added in and everything that I guess were also from Ragnar Redbeard. All of this is here. This is a very complete text. There's no doubt about it. But the footnotes are very tedious. Very, very tedious. A lot of them are really just, I mean, there's good footnotes where it's telling you where the ego in its own, would say the same. There's, and there's footnotes, maybe okay. So a lot of the footnotes are just giving you the source of what he's referencing and what he's talking about. Again, when it's pointing at other egoist texts, I think that's interesting. When it is translating or giving you an understanding of what he means by a certain thing, that's great. But when it's just saying, oh, this is from, and giving you the original quote, because there's a point where literally Ragnar Redbeard is using biblical language, like he's using a verse right out of the Bible. And when Trevor Blake just decides to give you the full context of that verse from within the Bible, that can be interesting. But at the same time, it's like, because I'm one of those guys that reads all the footnotes, and reading the footnotes, again, a lot of it just felt very tedious. But the really great footnotes in this is when Trevor Blake is pointing out where something that somebody said much later than when this book came out, say quotes from Theodore Roosevelt or others, seem to very clearly pull from Might is Right. And him showing This might be the best thing about this book. The authoritative edition, the footnotes showing how many people have read this book, quoted this book, and were clearly influenced by it. Again, like Theodore Roosevelt and some others, that's the gem here. Because I think that points at another book that we've talked about, which is The Occult Technology of Power, which Underworld Amusements has a copy of that out as well. How in that book, which it's a fictional book, it's a fictional presentation of very real egoist ideas, okay? That book is basically, the idea behind the book is that it's supposed to be one of the elites, okay, writing to their son of the nature of reality, which they claim is egoism, okay? In that book, one of the things that the elite is telling to his son is that, look, we know how this works. We know there's no rules. We know there's no right and wrong. We know, blah, blah, that rights are horseshit and all this other stuff. But you can't let the little people know, because then we'll lose power and they can't handle it anyway. And I feel like pointing this out of the people who seem to very clearly be quoting or being influenced by Might is Right gives credence to the notion of what The Occult Technology of Power as a book was saying. That the elites do know that egoism is the way of the world. They run off of it. They just don't want you to. And so that was maybe the most interesting part of this entire book, and is very much worth it. Because again, I do think it adds on to that theory. And I would not be surprised if The Occult Technology of Power, the people who wrote that, recognize that as well within the text Might is Right. Because this is a very popular text amongst egoists. Even though most egoists will also agree with the editor and Peter Gilmore that, talking about the racism and misogyny is just fucking horrible. Now, a major critique I have of this, and if you just want more proof of how much of an asshole Trevor Blake is, and I don't say that in a good way, let's see here. Where is it? It's on the, I know it's on the copyright page. Anyway, he basically says that this is a new book. Okay. Here it is. Okay, right at the top. Might is Right by Ragnar Redbeard. This is right off the copyright page. As published between 1896 through 1927, is a book in the public domain. Might is Right, the authoritative edition, is a new work based on many years of research and effort, and is not in the public domain. All rights reserved. So basically, Trevor Blake, or Underworld Amusements, is saying, yeah, we know Might is Right is in the public domain, but no, this is a completely new work, and this is a completely new work, and we own it. And I just talk about contradictions in egoism. I mean, that's a fucking contradiction. If you know that intellectual property is a spook, what the fuck are you doing? But whatever, and the sad part of that is that, like I said, when I reread this, the footnotes were interesting, but I don't feel like, comparing the 4 editions, which there are footnotes about where the differences are, and those are somewhat interesting, but I don't feel like any of that really changed the message of the book at all. They just didn't. Okay. So a part of me feels like the only reason that there's this claim of it being a remix of 4 editions, of at least 4 editions of this book, is so that they can get the copyright on it. And that's horseshit. Like that's just absolute fucking horseshit. So there's my thoughts on that. But otherwise, I mean, do I think that this is a worthy book to have? Absolutely. There is no other book quite like this. There are terrible things in it, but there are also incredibly beautiful things and inspiring things within this text. That I think, and I think it's an important historical text at the very least, whether you agree with it, I hope you don't agree with it completely, whether you agree with it 70%, 50%, 20%, or 0%. It is just as important, as I have recommended people do over the years, as reading Mein Kampf. I am telling you that as a Jewish person. Go ahead, read Mein Kampf, because I want you to see evil when it rears its ugly head, and that book shows it to you. What it looks like, what its writings look like. I've also recommended reading White Power by George Lincoln Rockwell. Know the language, know the lingo of tyranny, fascism, hate, authoritarianism. Having personal power, like Might is Right talks about, is not the same thing as authoritarianism. It's just not. Okay, personal power is a great and wonderful thing. Power over others, especially without their consent, that's a whole other ballgame. And that's where you start leading into authoritarianism. Okay? Suppose there's a conversation to have around that. You can ask me, and folks, the question tank, the hopper is low, so please feel free to ask me on that, okay? And we can have a bigger conversation if you disagree. Don't unsubscribe. Please have the conversation with me. I want you to, okay? And I want to have it with you. So anyway, I think that this book is very worthwhile. It was an enjoyable read, even the parts that are frankly disgusting. But some of it was interesting in that, like some of the concepts within incel culture have been around for over 100 years, if not longer. And Midas Wright can point that out. So it gives you an interesting picture on history with even the parts that you hopefully completely disagree with. So moving on from that, so do check this out. I do recommend it. And I just want to I will give a thank you, to this being out there still, even though I disagree with the IP around it. But a thank you to being very forthright. Everybody involved with this book today being very forthright and saying when he talks about racism and misogyny, he is dead wrong. When he talks about women being inferior and all this shit, he is wildly off base. And great. I'm glad that they did that. So, okay, let's move on to some other questions, shall we? We'll pull up the old hopper here. Okay, here's a good recent one with a tech angle. We'll get, and this shouldn't take too long. I know I've been talking about that book for about 40 minutes now. Stallion, my MSI Ghost. Ooh, nice laptop there, buddy. My MSI Ghost is spiking like crazy with the CPU, and I recently read about Windows 10 update KB4512941. That's a mouthful. How is Microsoft letting these update problems slide? And B, what does the average person do about these sorts of things? My laptop becomes unusable for all intents and purposes for quite some time every time my CPU spikes. This is Nucking Futz. And they actually spelled it Nucking Futz. I think I know where you got that from. Anyway, it's not from me, even though I've said that too. Okay, so in fact, that might even lead to, this is an anonymous email, but I might know who you are if you said that. All right. So anyway, yes. So what happened is this is a recent, I think it was a part of the cumulative update, KB4512941. Whew. And this is an update that, in fact, I saw this come up because I was away. And so I did not update my Windows 10 machine, right away. And it came up as an optional update and not one that I was forced to do, which I thought was very interesting that it came up that way. And maybe it's because they were aware of this problem. Basically, this update, and it hasn't been properly fixed yet. I'll put a link in the show notes. Windows Central, who's run by a left market anarchist, they have a couple of fixes where you can uninstall the update, which will solve the problem, or where you can do an edit in the registry, which will solve the problem. But, I'm just going to say this quickly. The real way to solve this, uninstall Windows 10. That'll do it. Oh. Yeah, so you had two questions here. How is Microsoft letting these update problems slide? Okay, this is where and I've said this many times, I am going to empathize and I am going to give Microsoft a pass, just a little bit of a pass, in that the amount of hardware that Windows 10 has to work with, a lot of the proprietary hardware that only their engineers can work on, and like getting really nitty gritty with and all this stuff. It is genuinely Windows, not just Windows 10. Windows is a miracle. It is a miracle that it can do half of what it can do. When, so many people, and I understand why, and there was a point where I felt that way, and then I kind of understood Microsoft's perspective a little bit better. This is over a decade ago. So many people were so fucking pissed off with Windows Vista, not because of performance issues and things like this with Vista. There's plenty of those. They were pissed off because Vista killed so many drivers that Windows had been supporting all the way up until XP and previously for like 20 some odd years. And they're really pissed off about that. And I understand why they were pissed off. I really, really do. But at the same time, there was a part of me that just like had a sigh of relief, an empathetic sigh of relief for Microsoft, because it's like, holy fuck, how are you keeping those running? How are you keeping all those drivers working with, all of the link libraries that, or all the DLLs and everything? Like, how are you doing that? Because, I mean, there's thousands and you had to maintain all those. That's nuts. And I'm not saying, I'm not displeased that they were. I'm just saying that I don't know how they did it. And, every one of those could potentially be an exploit. There's so many tighten the shit up, And so at the same time, it is a miracle that Microsoft can run on all of the hardware configurations that it does. It's a miracle that Windows can. It's a miracle that Microsoft can even begin to keep up with all that. Okay? Like Microsoft doing, and initially, when Microsoft is coming out with Surface hardware, believe it or not, I was clapping. Because if they're not going to open source their shit, if they're going to stay closed source, you might as well do it the way that Apple does it. Because that's the only way you could possibly truly manage security. Okay, is by having a very limited hardware configuration set to deal with. Apple knows this. Frankly, Google knows this with Chromebooks where, the hardware needs to be really certified. I know there's a lot of people, and you can run Chrome OS, you can get it to run on just about any other hardware configuration. But a lot of the security that Google wants to make official with Chromebook releases has to be where they are dealing with hardware sets that they know. And that's why they say they will only support new Chrome OS updates for 5 years on a certain, say, laptop release, or even, if you have a Chrome box, if you have a desktop release of some kind. Because they know to do genuine security, and the security that they, without being hyperbolic, or without bullshitting in their marketing, which fuck Google, but at the same time, thank you for a company really doing what it takes to live up to their marketing message. For Chrome OS to be the secure platform, which it is, not necessarily secure away from the NSA, right? But from just about everybody else, yeah, they do so much fucking right. And I've never said differently. And that's part of the reason, especially when I was still a Google fanboy and in early years of Sovereign Tech, why I was so supportive of everybody fucking buying a Chromebook. Because finally, this was a platform that was doing it right. But that 5-year support, that's beyond reasonable of what you could do, of how many people you could put on a project like that. Okay, and be able to support that hardware. This is one of the issues with Linux. While Linux as an operating system is far more secure, and because it is open source and everybody can come to the table, you can get people writing stuff for their quirky hardware and everything, and they can contribute and make it part of the whole. And that's great. But most of these companies are not going to do open sourcing. I think eventually Windows is going to be open source. I've predicted that for a while, and there have been Microsoft engineers that have suggested as much in recent years. Okay. But until that happens, God damn it. Yeah, they're going to have these update problems. Eventually they're going to learn that you can do one of two things. You can either open source the fuck out of everything, or, okay, you have to create a very streamlined product, hardware configuration product release to where it only works on certain laptops or certain desktops. And I don't think that's ever going to go over well because, the main thing that keeps Windows afloat is the enterprise space, which granted there's a bit of different rules with that. But in the consumer space, what keeps it going are gamers. It's just a reality, folks. PC gamers, they spend so much money on their shit that, it makes up for, everybody else effectively getting Windows 10 for free. It really does in a very real way. That can't go on forever, and it hasn't gone on forever, but you get my point. So those are the two directions you can go. Okay. Now, Chrome OS is trying to keep things, there's a lot more than just the OS itself that comes along with that philosophy and with that goal of that product, of that project. Okay. There's the low cost of the laptop. That is another issue that comes, or that's another thing that comes along with that, which is in part of that low cost aspect of things is why they're still keeping, even though Chrome OS is largely open source, not all the way, even though it's largely open source, it's part of the reason that they are keeping the hardware, like you have to give verify. And yes, I know, you need to be an OEM for Microsoft, but to technically sell something with Windows on it, but you don't really need to be. I mean, an OEM, as somebody who's worked in the tech space and had to call Microsoft personally as an OEM, I know how loose those rules are. Okay. Google's being far more serious about that. There's a reason that they kind of have this little more tightly knit, even though they are kind of like Linux and that they can be open source and people can contribute, but not really. So that, anyway, Chrome OS is a category unto itself. So yeah, Microsoft really can't do anything about this. All they can do is either open source Windows and get an entire community behind it, adding in, which is likely going to happen, or they have to just double down on Surface products. And there was a time where I think they knew this, and with their Surface products, product line, they were trying to push out OEMs. They were trying to push out Dell, and they were trying to push out HP. I mean, they really were, and you could see it. There were plenty of cases and stories that were happening, and lingo or language from Microsoft that was clearly hinting at that. So, or, like they were trying to get OEMs to do signature series releases of Windows, right? Where all of the drivers are verified and everything. Again, that's part and parcel of the same thing. That's part of the same solution of having a more limited product line. And so that's really like, yeah, it's ridiculous on Microsoft's part, but then at the same time, what can they do? I really understand where they're coming from. Now let's see, what does the average person do about these sorts of things? Well, like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes, but really get away from Windows. And I don't care if you want to run to Chrome OS. I mean, the fact that Chrome OS can run Linux software now and can truly be offline and a lot of this other stuff makes that far more interesting. Okay. But yeah, I mean, start running Linux laptops, or if you're a Mac person, okay, you're a little bit better off though. Boy, how about that iOS problem, huh? with the web pages. Oh, we're going to talk about that, on Sovereign Tech, coming up. Anyway, okay, so there you go. I haven't experienced this because I didn't roll out the update yet. I'm waiting for a more permanent fix of some kind. But there's your conversation. So, okay, here, let's get to this other question quick, and then we have a solid album of the week that I want to talk about. Or maybe I'll just briefly mention it and you can check it out. But here we go. So, greetings, man of tomorrow. Wanted to extend a thank you to you for convincing me to get back into hard copy. And by that I mean Blu-rays. Woo, and some DVDs. Okay, he says, and some DVDs, then he gives the woo. That's nice. Funny thing about DVDs, right? In fact, he puts in quotes here, like they are sometimes better, right? And yeah, most recent example of this, there's more to the question, I'll get to it. Most recent example of this that I've seen, Roadhouse. So Ellen and I were watching this because this is just one of the greatest. Roadhouse is one of the greatest movies ever made, straight up. If someone said it was the greatest movie ever made, I wouldn't argue with them a whole lot. But the DVD, the Blu-ray version of Roadhouse is actually missing all of the special features, and they are substantial. Like, there's 2 commentary tracks, there's 2 making specials, ton of shit that's on the DVD. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh man, because like the documentaries for Roadhouse are fantastic. Like you find out that Patrick Swayze, the guy that trained Patrick Swayze for that movie, I think it was in Taekwondo or whatever, or it was like kickboxing, I guess. The guy that trained him basically said, like, you don't understand how good Patrick Swayze was. I was trying to convince him to get into competitions because he could have beaten anybody in the world at that time. And I don't doubt it, but those are the fascinating things that you learn about that movie. I mean, there's just so much around it. It's such an incredible little film, but all of that's missing from the Blu-ray. There's other cases. Kindred the Embraced. They have the ultimate collection that comes with like the Book of Node or Nod or whatever, on DVD. A tremendous little collection. I think there's a Blu-ray collection of it that's like out of Europe. That's like region 2. It's missing all of that. There are a lot of cases where I actually have picked up the DVD edition of a movie. I mean, and I have an upscaling DVD player anyway, because it has way more special features than the Blu-ray does. And I mean, the picture quality, look, if you're up converting, it's good enough. You're still getting that high quality, better than probably, what you'd have to deal with as far as streaming, and depending upon your internet connection, and certainly better than, some compressed video files, some MKV from somewhere, even though those can be done very well. But regardless, yeah, if you're, there was maybe it was a climax or something where I had a big conversation around this, around, just that DVDs, not Blu-rays, DVDs, the DVD movement was a very unique and special and beautiful, frankly, time in the entertainment industry that superseded and was superior to TV, films, all of it. I mean, it was just a really, really special time. But you can see this even now when Blu-ray releases are really, a lot of them are inferior to what the DVD provides. And now a lot of Blu-ray releases actually come with the DVD anyway, but sometimes that's not, or often that's not true. And again, you're missing a lot of the great special features, which is one of the attractions. When I keep reading on with this, I think he mentions it. It's one of the attractions to having hard copy is getting all these special features. But it's funny, you have people saying DVD is dead. The fuck it is. Absolutely not. Some DVDs are the best versions of any movie or TV show that you could get anywhere. So anyway, let me read on. So he gives a woo here, but then we go on. The bonus features, okay, I just mentioned that. The bonus features and commentaries are so fun and educational. I genuinely don't understand how people can stand streaming services. I can't imagine taking in a movie without having the wealth of extraneous materia. He doesn't say material, it says materia, okay? Materia on disc. But I guess the one way I can appreciate streaming is my shelves are getting too fucking full. So my first half is appreciation, but the second half is a question. Do you keep the cases for your discs, or do you use disc binders? While I appreciate the artwork and bonus physical items, I really need a solution here. What doth the man of tomorrow do? Thank you for all of your incredible work, and please bring on more Sovereign Trek. So to the last point, yes, you're going to get more Sovereign Trek, and regularly. Okay, don't worry about that. I love doing that show. Everybody involved loves doing that show. So, anyway, so what do I do? Okay. For a long time, I actually kept my Blu-rays there's these plastic cases you can get, and they'll hold about 80 single disc Blu-rays, in their cases and everything. Okay. With the, the blue translucent case and all that, right? They're not binders. It's they look like, I don't know, a see-through tote bag. But they're the size specifically to carry around, or, size specifically to fit in DVD and Blu-ray discs. Okay. I use those for a long time, and you get 4 of them. Again, they hold about 80 discs a pop. If it's like a TV series, obviously it'd be different, but, you can get it for like $15 or so, online. Okay. And they're very nice, and they're great. When I was, when the studio was in the basement, previously, sometimes you have critters or other things, or, mold and whatever that could affect the discs. These would definitely protect them, and they did a great job. So it's a wonderful thing to have if you want to store them away, and they have little, carrying handles on them or whatever. But, no, I do use a binder, because same thing. I don't want to have all these cases, this is the same reason I read ebooks, is that you can store them, all onto an e-reader, and you don't have to have the books taking up physical shelf space. I'm not minimalist, but again, everybody thinks I am. I just, I don't know. I kind of have this notion of, take only what you can carry. And I don't 100% live by that. I look up and here's all these starships and Batmobiles and all this other shit above me. But regardless, the important things, I want to be able to carry them, and ebooks certainly would fall in with that. My DVD collection and Blu-ray collection, yeah, maybe, but whatever, I want to be able to have it as compact as possible, regardless. So yeah, having a good binder, and having a binder system, can be really, frankly, it can be a lot of fun to set all that up. I have one binder that holds everything, like a 400 disc binder, but you could really go all out with this and have it be a beautiful presentation on your shelves. Like I've seen those binders that they're made of like Italian leather and they look like books on the shelf, but you pull them out and they're actually, they're holding a bunch of discs and everything. I mean, that's really slick. That's nice. So, I think that could be a very interesting and attractive way of keeping all of your discs without taking up the amount of space that all of the disc cases do. Okay. So yeah, I do the binders and that's fine because one nice thing with Blu-rays anyway, DVDs, this is maybe where DVDs would be a little inferior. With Blu-rays, the Blu-rays will often label everything that's on the Blu-ray right on the disc itself. So you don't really need the case to know what's there. But then once you get into the menu, you know the score anyway, and you know the deal. But yeah, I'm a fan of keeping things lean and mean and keeping things compact. Part of the reason I was so into digital files for so long, of movies and TV shows, was because, it didn't take up space. It just sat on a hard drive. Okay, but now I think there's arguments to be made of why to have hard copy. Hard drives, of course, can go bad. Granted, discs can go bad over decades as well. Another reason for digital files is there's some things that have never been released on DVD or Blu-ray, that's the only way you're ever going to end up getting them. Of course, I will often now make Blu-rays or DVDs of these things, but that's a whole other project in itself. A lot of things, like for example, so I have the backers edition of What We Left Behind, the Deep Space Nine documentary. We're going to do a nice little roundtable review of this in a Sovereign Trek we have been meaning to for a while. I'm glad I kind of waited for the Blu-ray because that gives a little more perspective on this documentary because of the bonus features that come with the backers edition, which, I backed it 3 years ago. Do I think what I got in my hands is worth it? I'll save it for the Sovereign Trek, but I don't know, maybe you can tell by the hint of my voice of how I do feel about that. Regardless, this is the only way you can get this, is with having the actual Blu-ray. Nobody's been posting this online. Nobody's been posting special features or anything. So, there's an advantage there, kind of what we were talking about earlier, how like Underworld Amusements only release books in paper format. So I guess I see this as, video files, again, I did that for a long time, but then, you get to missing here's an important takeaway. Everything you own, in my opinion, it's not meaningless, but it doesn't reach its full potential of meaning unless you can share it with someone. And there are a lot of things, especially with movies, and parts of that have to do with DVD releases of those movies, where there are parts that to fully appreciate, kind of like what this person said in the email, to fully appreciate a film or a show or whatever, you need some of this extraneous materia, right? Like the emailer said. You need it because it brings understanding. Okay. Like, one of my favorite examples, Conan the Barbarian. Okay. The movie with Arnold. Ellen and I watched it and I said, we got to watch it. You have to watch it with the commentary track of Arnold and John Milius, the director, talking, because they're trash during it and they're just making fun of everything. And it's hilarious. It is just an incredible. It is a great way to experience that movie. And you appreciate that movie on a whole other level once you watch it with that commentary. Now, I know with an MKV file or whatever else, you can add in different audio tracks and everything. I certainly have plenty of movies like this. Okay. I'm not saying to throw away your video files at all, or to delete them, I should say. But there is something tangible and beautiful about having because you sure as fuck don't trust streaming, because with streaming, you don't know if you're getting here's a great example. Like say the WWE Network. Okay. There are like pay-per-views or events that I have where I have like a hard copy of it. But if you watch it streaming on the WWE Network, like they take out the original music because they don't have the rights to it anymore. You run into all kinds of IP problems when you rely upon streaming. It's only when you have a finished product in your hand, like a Blu-ray or a DVD, that you can hold on to things as they were. It's akin to building a structure out of stone. You can't really change it much, So, yeah, there's something special to that. But I think doing the binders, I guess basically I'm saying, yes, I do use binders. Go ahead and use binders. A lot of the artwork for a lot of Blu-rays is, frankly, it's shit. There was a time where, like, the casing for DVDs was a major presentation, and you could see that they put a lot of thought into it. Those days have passed. Those days have really passed. And frankly, here's another thing. Like my copy of my Blu-ray set of a lot of TV series, but particularly like the original series of Star Trek and all that, the cases, they have these weird like two little notches, and those notches that hold the disc into the case, they break all the time. You could get them brand new and they're broken. And so the cases are shit today. And I get it. It's like, they're doing it for environmental reasons. They want to use less plastic so they don't make them as strong as they are. The cases are shit today. So just toss the cases. Like, for that reason alone, you could just go with the binder. But maybe I gave you some other things to think about as far as that goes. So yeah, I don't think I have to spend much more time on that. But yeah, binders are a good thing because, frankly, again, these cases that the shit comes in is, it's horrible. And if you have a few where you want to keep the cases, then keep the cases. Like that What We Left Behind documentary. So the Backers edition, in fact, it's actually funny. The Backers edition comes with a custom case. The bad part is you can tell this custom case was probably put together. It looks like it was just like printed on an inkjet printer. You can even see the white at the side of it. It's so bad. But, you only get this case, or you only get that cover if you were a backer of it. So that's kind of a special case. So just, hold on to those, and then the others you can all toss into a binder. How about that? So anyway, let's wrap this one up. I'm just going to give you a recommendation for Album of the Week. There's not a whole lot to talk about here, but if you're looking for some standard power metal fare, Visions of Atlantis. Not like the greatest power metal band ever by any means, but they come out with really, really solid releases every couple of years. In fact, actually, I think their last one, what was that? No, I think they had one in 2017. I wanted to say it was 2016. But anyway, they just came out with a new album, 2019. It's called Wanderers. Do check it out. It'll certainly get you by a session in the gym if you want to rock that. But yeah, I dug the album. There's no like great song really to point out with it. It just has that great power metal feel to it. And I certainly always enjoy that. Band out of Europe, but I mean, just solid stuff. So Visions of Atlantis, Wanderers, check that out. We're already over an hour now, so I don't want to spend a ton of time there. But there's your Album of the Week. We'll wrap this baby up, and I will see all of you on the other side. More Sovereign Tech to come. Don't worry. Lots of Sovereign Tech to come out. Got you covered. It's been crazy travel, crazy busy days. And anyway, I'll see all of you on the other side.